Okay, so how do you make a starter? I'm just going to give you really simple instructions, but you can look through various articles online on how to try to make your own starter, and you can pick up various tips and tricks to help make it more successful. What you're going to start out with is some flour, preferably fresh ground. That would be ideal. You can even try with white flour, but I would suggest a 50-50 mix of white flour and whole wheat flour, fresh ground preferably. I'm going to hydrate it with some water and stir it up in this jar, and then I'm going to let it sit. And what's going to happen in this jar is there will be wild yeast that occurs on the wheat flour. And with the addition of water and with the content of the starch that's in the flour, that yeast will start to grow and multiply. Now, there may be a few different competing yeasts on this flour or in my home, in the environment. And that's where it can get a little bit tricky, and you have to be patient, because within the sourdough starter, different competing yeasts and different competing bacteria are gonna have to battle it out to see who is dominant. Once a dominant strain has been selected and is growing and is strong, that's when you will be able to make bread. Before that happens, you may not be able to make a loaf of bread that is successful. And that could take anywhere from 3 days. For me, the first time I tried making my own starter, it took 30 days. So you may have to be very patient. And what you're gonna do is go ahead and mix those together. So I'll kind of demonstrate how simple that is. So I'm using a 1/4 cup whole wheat flour that I ground at my house. You can use store-bought whole wheat flour. I think you might have a little better success with fresh ground, but you can try whole wheat that you buy at the store. You can also try it with white flour. You just have a little bit less chance of having a nice strain of wild yeast on the white flour because it's been through so much processing. Okay, so I'm gonna mix those two flours together. Then I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of water. Now, the type of water that you use is somewhat important. If you are on city water or have any sort of chlorine or other contaminants in your water, then you will definitely have better luck getting some filtered water. What I found is that the water that my sourdough loves the very most is spring water. I definitely think that spring water is, if you want to have the best chance of success, that's what I would recommend using. So it's kind of like maybe a little bit thicker than pancake batter. Anywhere in that consistency is decent. So once you have a dominant yeast strain and you have a couple of lactobacillus bacteria strains that are dominant and they're working together with the yeast, and you have a really harmonious culture, the sourdough starter is going to create some acids that kind of protect it from outside organisms, microorganisms. But before you have that nice, healthy culture, your starter is going to be just a little bit more susceptible to contamination. So what you want to do to prevent as much possible chance of contamination as you can is you're going to, after you've stirred up your starter, you're going to clean off your spoon. And then what I like to do, you can take a rag, but my hands have lactobacillus on it, and that's good for starters. And my hands are relatively clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean off the sides of my jar that are above the starter culture that I'm trying to create. So I'm going to use my finger. I'm going to just clean it off to where the sides are relatively clean. And what that's doing is kind of taking out, you can see my jar is fairly clean above the line of the starter. That's going to keep it from trying to grow extra mold and collecting bacteria or other yeast that I don't want in there. So you don't have to have it perfectly clean, but making it fairly clean and dry and getting the big lumps of gooey flour and water off the sides is going to help a little bit. Okay, now that you have your flour and your water mixture mixed together, the magic is going to happen within your jar. I like to use this plastic cling film. You can secure a fabric across the top with a rubber band. You definitely need to keep fruit flies and other contaminants out. This works really well because there's no danger of it exploding because it's flexible. It clings to the sides of the jar so nothing can get in. And it is easy to take on and off, and I can use it for a long time. So now that we have it ready, it's protected from outside debris and fruit flies and things. The rest is up to the starter. I'm gonna let this sit for 12 hours. If after 12 hours it's bubbly and kind of rising, that's a really good sign that things are going on. If I haven't seen any movement in 12 hours, I'm gonna leave it for a full 24 hours before I disturb it. Once I start seeing some bubbles and a little bit of action, and one way that you can tell if there's been any action is you can take a little Sharpie marker and mark a little line on your jar so that you know what level it started out as. And that way you'll be able to tell if it grew up on the glass side and expanded or if it didn't. And once you start to see some expansion, basically what you're going to do is you're going to treat it like a regular starter. It's not a regular starter yet because there is not yet an established symbiotic culture between yeast and bacteria, but we're going to treat it like it is. So what that means is about every 12 hours, we're going to leave it out at room temperature. If we were to put it in the refrigerator, it would go dormant and not a lot is going to happen at that temperature. But out at room temperature, or maybe even you have a little spot in your house that's just slightly warmer, we should start to see action and we should start to see things bubbling and moving. When it's time to feed it again, what we're going to do is we're going to discard half of what's in here and we're going to feed it again with about a 1/4 cup flour and a 1/4 cup water. The flour blend that I'm going to use is half whole wheat and half white flour. Rye flour works well too, so you can use completely rye flour or you can use a blend of rye flour with whole wheat or white flour. When it's time to feed it, we're going to feed it each time and wait for 12 hours. So a good schedule would be to get up in the morning, feed your starter, and then before you go to bed, feed it again. Now, once this is an established starter and it's got good growth and you're making good bread, when you discard, you don't have to throw the discard away. You can use it for other recipes. Before your starter is really established and you have good growth and you have good yeast and lactobacillus cultured in there, it is not really recommended to eat the discard. So that's going to go in the trash. So that's one of the reasons we're keeping it really, really small, is so that we don't have to throw away a lot of flour and water. Okay, now that you've let your brand new starter that you're trying to get going sit for 12 to 24 hours, it's time to feed it again. So what you're going to do is you're going to kind of eyeball it and you're going to throw away about half of what you have here. Okay, so we're going to start out with a 1/4 cup, and I'm going to blend my flours here right inside my cup. They don't have to be perfect. So that's a blend of white flour and whole wheat, and that's a 1/4 cup. Then I'm going to use my measuring cup and put in a 1/4 cup of water. Okay, now I'm gonna get a really good stir. Sometimes you'll get lumps of flour in there and you just need to be patient and make sure it all breaks up. And you're trying to spread the bottom portion of your starter that you left in with the new flour and water so it can get inoculated. Okay, I'm just digging into those corners, making sure everything gets hydrated. Okay, you can see we have that nice consistency that we had before. It was kind of like a little bit thick pancake batter is how I would describe it. And using my hands are clean. Using your hands with sourdough is perfectly fine. I'm going to use my finger again as a squeegee to try to make sure the sides of my dish they don't have to be perfectly clean, but they do need to be pretty dry. Okay, so my jar is fairly clean there on the walls. And now it's ready to sit for another 12 hours. What we're going to do is we're just going to keep repeating that process until we should see really good growth in the middle of that 12 hours of bubbles. And our starter should really go up about, I don't know, maybe an inch or two up above the line that it's at now between feedings. When you start to see that happen and it's really consistent, that's a really good sign that you have a good culture established and that you've got your starter fought it out and one yeast strain became dominant. And there will usually be about 2, 3, maybe 4 lactobacillus strains that are working with that yeast to create acids and to really protect the starter from outside microbes. When you get to that point, that's when, if you think it might be ready, that's when it's time to start your first sourdough loaf and see what happens. That's what will tell you if your culture is strong or if it still needs some more time. Now that we've got our new sourdough ready, it's time to name it and give it a cute name. Maybe we'll name it Dottie, like that name for my little starter. I need to cover it with the plastic so that nothing can get in, and it's ready to go in a warm spot. I'm going to put it somewhere where it's not in direct sunlight and somewhere it won't get disturbed, but I also want to put it somewhere where I'm not going to forget about it. So it will be ready, and we'll keep feeding that until it's a strong starter.